Good evening and welcome to tonight's shiur. I'm trying to project my voice a bit better because of the air conditioning in the background. If it's a problem, so please alert to me. Thank you. So, Parshas Chukas Bolok, and I'm going to say the first question is actually my own question. Having traveled and then trying to recover, you feel a few days after travel that you traveled, especially a lot of different time zones. So there is a halacha that you for 3 days after you've traveled, you potter from davening. I know we don't follow that. There is such a halacha. It's brought in Rambam also on the sefer on the screen. You can see here Gemara in Eruvin of Mem Samach Hey. Omer Abba whoever habo min haderech al yispalo shloisha yomim, because the Rashi says from the Yegias Haderech, from the effort of the journey, you won't be able to concentrate. No, nowadays we're not so into. No, we don't concentrate so well anyway, so therefore we don't take liberty of this. But meanwhile, I'm sure some of you will agree that after a long journey, it takes you a couple of days to recover. So now, when it comes to Birchas HaGomel, it says that you should only say Birchas HaGomel when you recover totally from your what you went through. And you have here the lashon from the Alter Rebbe, Ein levorach at sheyetzev yosmin sakon legamri. Therefore, a person who had a medical experience, well, it takes time till you are really back to yourself. But then, if that's the case, why is there an emphasis to say Birchas HaGomel within 3 days, when actually within 3 days you're still within the trauma of your journey? The Chari should dafka wait after 3 days, and then once you've recovered from the trauma of your journey, that's Yotzei min hasakon legamri, and yet that's not the case. So I thought there was like a totally random shidduch over here, but actually, look, surprise, surprise. Let's go now to the Bis Yosef and Siman Reish Yud Tes, where the Tur had said that if you didn't say Birchas HaGomel on time, you can make up for it later. Zohi Svaras Rabbeinu. However, the Orchos Chaim quotes the Ramban that you have only 3 days to say Birchas HaGomel. And says the Bis Yosef, or perhaps the Orchos Chaim, I'm not sure. Ani Motzosi Kosov. The reason for where does the 3 days come from? It says in Eruvin that if you travel, habo min haderech lo yispal ad shloisha yomim, which means that until 3 days you're still called bo min haderech. So that's actually the whole 3-day business is actually coming from the halacha in about habo min haderech is al yispal. So it's very interesting. So what he seems to be saying is, and until 3 days are over, you're still in the trauma of your journey, and that's why you should say Birchas HaGomel whilst you're still kind of in the trauma of your journey. So that I don't have an answer. How does that fit with the guidance of Yotzei min hasakon legamri? It seems to the opposite, to say dafka whilst you're still feeling a little bit groggy from your journey. Okay, that's the first observation. The second observation is, now take a look how the Alter Rebbe presents this. He says, don't say Birchas HaGomel until you recovered from your journey, to recovered me'asakona. And if you delayed, it's open-ended. V'nochen shelo la'acher gimel yomim, not to delay 3 days. Lefi choch im yotzei min hasakona. Now he doesn't talk about a journey here. You were in some kind of danger, and you were relieved from that danger on a Monday, and it was after Kriyas HaTorah. Then you should say Birchas HaGomel b'fnei Asora without a Sefer Torah, and don't wait till Thursday. So he words it Yotzei min hasakona. Now let's go through this carefully. The Shulchan Aruch, if we have 1.2 in same ratio test, says V'nochoin sheloi la'acher shloisha yomim. He says the idea of 3 days. It doesn't differentiate, doesn't go into detail. From a sakona, from a journey, it doesn't go into detail. The Mogen Avraham writes, V'im yotzo b'yoim sheni yevorech b'fnei asora b'lei sefer Torah. Yotzo, he means you arrive back from a journey. So why yotzo? So was he's saying yotzo min hasakona. So if you were, that's where the Alter Rebbe gets his wording from. It was within 3 days. You should say brochos HaGomel within 3 days of yotzo min hasakona. But where did it come from? It comes from the Knesset Agdola. So let's now go to the Knesset Agdola. In other words, this detail. Shulchan Aruch says to say brochos HaGomel within 3 days. This emphasis that if you have, if you came out, you kind of out of your situation, your problem situation on a Monday, don't wait till Thursday. So that comes from the Knesset Agdola. Yeah. So the 3 days is mentioned in Ochos Chaim, etc. But this detail, if it's one day, Monday, don't wait till Kriyas HaTorah Thursday, is from Knesset Agdola. Now let's read it over here. V'ani noyeg k'shani bo min haderech on Yom Sheni. So when I'm traveling and I arrived at my destination on Monday, and there's not going to be a Kriyas HaTorah until when? Until Thursday, and by then there'll be 3 days. Then I do brochos HaGomel within 3 days without waiting until Yom Chamish. So what I'm seeing here is very, very strange. First of all, since the idea of Shloisha Yomim is based upon derech, the trauma of journey, so who says that the concept of 3 days applies by other forms of relief, of chole, yisurim, whatever? What's 3 days got to do with it? There's clearly, if the basis is this Gemara of al yispal bo min haderech shloisha yomim, that's where it's coming from. So then it should be limited to bo min haderech. And yet the Mogen Avraham and the Alter Rebbe, they presented yotzo min hasakona, number one, and number two, the Mogen Avraham is based upon the Knesset Agdola, and there is clearly this business of 3 days and not to wait till the Thursday. If you came safe on Monday, you're clearly talking dafka about bo min haderech, and Mogen Avraham changes it to yotzo and yotzo min hasakona, and that's why the Alter Rebbe quotes it. All I can say is, I mean, I don't have an answer. I once heard from, I think I heard this from Reb Shalom Edelman, Olav Shalom. The Alter Rebbe is said to have said in his later years that he has charata, he regrets having given so much reliance on the Mogen Avraham. That's a well-known thing. But I heard from Rabbi Edelman that what he meant was in this, that the Mogen Avraham often quotes from other Sfarim. And the quote is not necessarily a full quote. And if you look up in the quote, in the source, you'll see things different. And the Alter Rebbe relied on the quotes of the Knesset Agdola in the Mogen Avraham, which are very, very many, and without having access to the actual Knesset Agdola. Later, if you see the actual Knesset Agdola, you'll see them. It's lav dafka the same. But meanwhile, I'm going to leave this with a question. So 2 points will come up over here. Number one, that it's very interesting that the cheshbon of 3 days has got to do with that you're still feeling that you're bo min haderech. That's why it should be within 3 days. And then the second point, which I'm left with a question, is that the 3 days seems to be limited to in Svara only to bo min haderech, and yet it's applied to all forms of relief from trauma. Okay, next question I do not have a slide for, and that is someone designs websites, and I guess they do a good job, and a church wanted to, it's a group of churches, they wanted to create a website which will be used for promoting their ideology, but also for fundraising, etc. And so now the question is asking, am I allowed to take on the job, which is a well-paid job, and you take on that project? Of course, the hesitation is that you are facilitating a spread of an ideology which we don't identify with at all. It's in Avodah Zarah. So by taking the job, you're supporting something. Now, so there's something similar in Igros Moshe, and that's talking about having an architect, whether a Jewish architect could draw up plans for a church. So the rule is the following. There is an expression in English, aiding and abetting, assisting someone to do something against Torah. Now, we have in Halocha two levels. One is when they could not have done it without you, and one is when they could have done it without you. The classic example in the Gemara is there's a Nazir on one side of the river, and there's a glass of wine on the other side of the river, and you are, I guess, you're paddling in the middle of the river, and the Nazir asks you, can you pass the glass of wine? So he could not, the term is Trei Ivri Denare, two sides of the river, he can't reach it himself. So when you pass the glass of wine to the Nazir, which is he's not allowed to drink, you are facilitating something which he could not manage without you. That kind of facilitating is defined as lifnei iver lo sitan michshel. You are creating a stumbling block for the blind. The person doesn't realize the severity of the Easter. Okay, that's also in Torah. Then you have, it's not trei ivri dinar. He could reach over to the glass of wine himself, but it's just to make his life easier. He says, could you pass it to me? And that can be applied. The resources for his wrongdoing can be gotten elsewhere, but you are providing him those resources. Now, you're not over of lifnei iver because he can manage on his own, but there's a lesser level, and that's called Messiah Bidei Over Aveda, assisting, facilitating, helping. I don't know exactly what the term in English, aiding and abetting. But if the Aveda could be done without you, and you are helping them, that's Isur Rabban. The general principle is, general psak is that Isur Messiah, the lesser form of facilitating, is not awesome. It does not apply to Goyim. To Goyim, there's an Isur of Lifnei Iver. There's no Isur of Messiah. So on that basis, Moshe says that the architect would be allowed to design this church, etc. And actually, it's even in Gemara in Avodah Zarah, it talks about building with them. Just when it comes to the one particular part, just to say this part I can't build. So overall, it is permitted halacha. At the same time, it's certainly something which should be discouraged. It's not a nice, it's not, you don't get, it's not something to be encouraged. Yeah. Thank you, Gershon, for the term accessory. Thank you. Okay, so that would be the same thing here with the website. You can't say it's also for him to build the website, but it is a dova meguna. It's something which you should discourage, not being a keli for bracha. Okay, now this third question, I'm not going to give you a clear answer, but here was the question. There's some unmarried girls at a wedding. There's a bottle of wine at the table, and they want to have a little bit of wine. Is there any guidance to say yes or no? So I did search, and I didn't find anything clear, but I'm going to show you what I did find clear. So this is in the Magen Avraham, and then later in Mishnah Berurah in Siman Kuf Ayin. Siman Kuf Ayin of Orach Chaim is Hilchas Derech Eretz B'Seudah. So here the Magen Avraham quotes Subas Daf Samach. Isha, a woman, a wife whose husband is not with her, Ein lo lishtos yain. She should not be imbibing wine. Achsanoi, if she's a guest, in someone else's house, even if husband is with her, also. But if she is used to drinking wine in the presence of her husband, she's allowed to drink a little bit, not in the presence of her husband. So there's obviously some concern here, and needless to emphasize that if a person is drunk, is a dover meguna, for a woman and for a girl to be so is totally unsneistic to the extreme. So here's a question though, a little bit of wine. And so it's talking about a married woman, and you could argue a married woman is perhaps more chomer, and therefore ein lo lishtes yain, without her husband being present. Or the other way, you can say, no, well, there at least she has some kind of awareness. She shouldn't go. She has a husband. A girl who doesn't have a husband is even more of a concern. Of course, by Kiddush we give out and we have a little bit of wine. Talking about having, I guess, a little bit more. Otherwise, they wouldn't ask the question. Yeah. So it's I don't have a clear answer to that. What I could say is I shared this shiur on last night, and there is a Gemara in Soita, that when the Soita was brought to the Beis Hamikdash to go through the motions of drinking the water, etc., and they would say, "Biti harbe yayin oise, harbe chaverim roim oisim." One of the causes for slipping, going a slippery slope is alcohol, and therefore, yes, it is a concern. Magen Avraham finishes off. Certainly, the same applies to other forms of alcohol. He refers us to, on the other hand, refers us to Ibn Ezer. It talks about how much a husband would provide for his wife, and talks about how much bread and bits to go with it, and shemen, oil for eating, oil for lighting. If it was common that women would drink wine, so to provide a ma'at yayin. So that's just the cross reference. And then if she's breastfeeding, noisten lo yayin, somehow it helps boost her milk production. So coming back, I did not find a clear guidance about unmarried women, and certainly having a lot of wine is something to be discouraged. Little bit of wine, I don't have grounds to say no. Let's move on. So now we have a question. There's a particular Chabad house where one of their sponsors wants to make a birthday party on Shabbos afternoon. This Chabad house is within an Eruv, and the sponsor, by the way, said whatever he spends on the party, he will also he'll match as a donation to the Chabad house. So they want to accommodate. And perhaps the more he spends on the party, the more he'll go to Chabad house. So he wants to give out a souvenir that each child should have a take-home gift, and not food. It should be something which will endure. And so now they're asking, is there a way they could give gifts, a take-home gift to the children at this party? So we do have a halacha in Shulchan Aruch about not giving gifts on Shabbos because of the problem of mekach or memka, of kinyan, of acquiring. And this you have from Siman Shin Vov, that those who are accustomed to give a kalim as a gift to a chosn, gave a good drasha, to give on Shabbos, to give a gift, again, probably with an Erev, lo yofehem oisim. That's not right. Interesting, he doesn't use a stronger language, that it's osur. Lo yofehem oisim. I saw, as I was researching, that although the Magen Avraham objects to this, there are poskim who are a bit lenient on this, so perhaps that's why it's a milder expression, lo yofehem oisim, that it's not appropriate to give gifts on Shabbos or Yom Tov other than food. So we have the classic situation where a mitzvah brocho is going to be presented in a synagogue, and be presented a siddur or a becher and inscribed, etc. And the way around it is that before Shabbos, that the rabbi or the shul president, whoever, gives the intended gift to another person, who makes a kinyan, lifts it to be koina on behalf of the bar mitzvah boy. In this way, it belongs to the bar mitzvah boy before Shabbos. And then you present it on Shabbos, but it was theirs already. So I suggested that they get these toys, and if they can, personalize the toys for the names of the kids who are going to be participating. And then on Erev Shabbos, someone will give to someone else who's not husband and wife, give to someone else, a secretary, whoever, to lift up each of these gifts on behalf of each of the children who will participate in the party on Shabbos. So this way, there's no problem of giving a maton on Shabbos. It's theirs before Shabbos. After I said that, and that's the benefit of giving a shiur, or this shiur, I had a reason to reflect on this. But perhaps if the idea of the person picking it up is a form of shlichus, well, child is not capable of making a shliach. Therefore, what's the point of the secretary picking up these toys on behalf of all of those little kids? The 4-year-old can't make them a shliach anyways. So that's where I was questioning myself. So I did look up. There is the term of zochin le'odom shalei b'fanav. You can be zoichet. You can acquire a merit for someone, even if they didn't ask you to do so. So here, this is from Gemara Kiddushin on the left of the screen. It's from the Gemara Kiddushin Daf Mem Beis, and that Gemara discusses the concept of shlichus. From where do we learn in Torah that shlichus works, that you can delegate and someone else doesn't act and it counts as if you did it? So, as we know, we had learned it from Trumo, and Kein Torimu Gam Atem, the Rabbi Shluchachem, or from Korban Pesach. It says every V'shachatu Oishe Kol Kahala Das Yisrael Bein Arbaim V'chikol Yisrael Shechtim Hein V'kan Shluchas Shalom K'Moshe. So there are various sources where we see the concept of shlichus. Frag the Gemara. Ve'lahodi Omer Rav Gidl. Rav Gidl of Rav says, from where do we know the Shluchas Shalom K'Moshe? Well, in Sefer Bamidbar, when it comes to the casting lots for the distribution of Eretz Yisrael for the various tribes, and it says v'nosi echod lashoved, they would each nosi of each tribe mimate will pick up a piece of paper which will have the plan of the area of the part of Eretz Yisrael, and this way this area of Eretz Yisrael will belong to that tribe. Well, then perhaps we can say, Rav Gidl says, the fact that the Nosi is doing a kinyan on behalf of his tribe, so you see that Shluchas Shalom K'Moshe, to which the Gemara rejects. But Tisbara, how could you say such a thing? You can think that this is called shlichus. But minors cannot appoint a shliach. And therefore, for those people who are going to enter Eretz Yisrael and going to receive a portion in the land, some of those were under bar mitzvah, and therefore they are not capable of appointing a shliach. And therefore, you cannot say that the nosi who's doing a kinyan of sorts on behalf of his tribe is doing so as the concept of shlichus, because children can't appoint a shliach. We have to rephrase this. He didn't say shluchas shalom k'moshe. From where do you know that you can do a kinyan on behalf of someone for their benefit, even in their absence? They don't know about it. Okay, so what we're seeing here from this Gemara very clearly, that despite children unable to point a shliach, but the concept of zochin le'odom shalei b'fonav, that someone can acquire something on behalf of someone else, applies even for a child. Now, as I said, I did look this up in Encyclopedia Talmudis, and there's a whole discussion. Then how does it work? If it doesn't work as shlichus, what are the mechanisms that this secretary will pick up this cuddly duck, whatever, on Friday, and it will belong to whichever child's going to be coming there, which his name's written on the toy. How does it work? I don't know. There's discussion about it. Is it shlichus or not? But meanwhile, what we do see clearly from this Gemara that Zochen Shalei Adam Shalei B'Fanav works for children also. So I was relieved that answer, that Eitzah was legitimate lalach. Okay, let's move on to our fifth question for this evening, and that is: someone is sitting at a sheva brochos, and then there are narrow tables, and there's tall, narrow wine glasses. And as is sitting there, across the table, there's a gentleman wearing a nice suit, and he had poured some wine into his tall goblet, and our shoyel kind of moved his plate a little bit, and inadvertently that knocked over the glass of wine, which in turn spilt some, let's say it was red wine, on his light colored suit. And so now here's the question: does he have a charayas? Does he have a duty to pay for the dry cleaning of the suit? Hopefully all that will work. But yeah, so this is the question. So looking into this carefully, we do know that there's a concept of odom muad liolam. A man is liable even if he's asleep, which means that if he lay down next to something which is breakable, and in the middle of his sleep he rolled over and he broke that breakable thing, he has to pay for it, even though he wasn't aware of what he's doing when he rolled over in his sleep. So that is the odom muad liolam ben eir ben yoshin. That's when he broke things directly. But then we have something called grama, which is indirect cause. And grama ben izokin, sometimes you say it's potter, sometimes what we're seeing over here is the following: that grama ben izokin may be potter, but medida shamayim, he should pay. But then he says, if it was b'shoigegei be'on oines, potter afilu medina shamayim. This is from the Sefer Piskei Choshen. He's saying that the concept of grama ben izokin seems to be from the earlier sources which he quotes, that the liability of grama ben izokin is a drabonon, and when it's b'shoigeg, that doesn't apply. So now, what happened over here? He moved his plate, and that knocked over a glass and spilt wine on the fellow's trousers. The trousers, Baruch Hashem, are still working. It's just that they've got a stain. All right. So then the damage here is clearly a indirect cause and has to be taken to the cleaners. Okay. That's all definitely on the level of grama. What's the difference between shoigeg and ba'oines? Shoigeg means you didn't realize what you're doing. Ba'oines means that you were out of control of the situation. Here, I wouldn't say it's a oines, but it is a shoigeg, that's for sure. And therefore, even medida shamayim is potter because it's grama ben izokin. Now, actually, I had a very interesting experience. I was in LA for a Shabbos. So 2 Fridays ago, I'm in LA. And by our host, I come back after I've gone out for lunch. I come back and I meet a friend of mine from 40 years ago. His name is Marcus Solomon. He is very prominent in Perth, in his hometown. He's a member of the bar. He's a judge over there. And so we hadn't really had a conversation in many years. And he says he's got a particular interest in Choshen Mishpat. Wonder why. And we were just schmoozing about the difference between civil law and halacha. One observation he made, which I'll share with you, is that halacha is much more in klolim, general rules, doesn't go into every nitty-gritty, whereas the civil law has got much more fine print, going to so many, what if this and this and this. But my observation was that in civil law, there's always someone who's liable. It's either this one or the other one or the third one. Generally, they will find someone who's liable, and that person has to pick up the tab. The idea that something it's taka, someone caused it, but he is not a chrai, and it's as if it were milmailo, it's damage, which, as they do have in insurance law, an act of God. That kind of thing, when it's ben odom lachavere, is not very common in Goyish law. Much that I know much about Goyish law, I just mentioned about 30 years ago, there was a major catastrophe in India. There was a factory which burned down with all the workers in it. Hundreds of people were killed, and it was a factory which belonged, let's say, to a company from England. It had been built by a German company, and it was like all different parties who were involved, and there was a major court case. Who has to be liable for obviously very serious damages? Is it the builder? Is it the designer? Is it the owner, etc.? And my observation was that in Halocho, probably all of them would not be liable because of all bad groma, and it would be all right. It's a hezek milmailo, and it's a came milmailo an oinish, which is very very tragic, but not necessarily does someone have to be picking up the tab. And that's just see the similar thing over here. Groma ben Yizoket, so who has to pick up the tab? That's unfortunately the person who wears the suit, wants to wear it, will have to pick up the tab. Right. Now, last week I did address about this person who needs to use the bathroom in the middle of Shmone Esrei, and I did not answer the question directly. I just said that the Alter Rebbe is very lenient in that you can, if you can retain yourself, you may continue davening. But that didn't answer the question: what happens if the person is unable to, and they do have to make an interruption? So the bottom line on that is they not speaking to anyone. There's no need for that, and that wasn't the question. Live alone, but they're obviously taking a time out. So it depends how long that time out was. You have in numerous areas of hefsek shoho kadei ligmor es kulam. If the time out was such, let's say, if they normally take 8 minutes to daven Shmone Esrei, and the time out was 9 minutes, so then such a long interruption, such a long pause would warrant that he goes back to the beginning of Shmone Esrei. If it was a shorter pause, let's say 7 minutes or less, so then that pause would not invalidate, it would not cut short the Shmone Esrei, and they're allowed to come back to the Shmone Esrei and start off from the brocho where they left off. If they were in the middle of a brocho, go to the beginning of that brocho. So that's the bottom line on that. Okay, let's go on to our next question. So this young woman asks a question. She puts money in a particular place, and that money is either she owes it to someone or she's saving for a particular purpose, and she can't remember whether this money is money I guess she knows whom she owes, and she's thinking perhaps this money is owing to someone specifically. On the other hand, she's concerned if she borrowed, let's say, $500, and she pays off $50 a month, and she sees $50, and she doesn't know whether she's still owing $50, and that's why she put it aside, or she's paid it in full, and if so, she's giving another $50. It's a problem of ribis. This is her question. She doesn't want to remain owing someone. On the other hand, if she doesn't owe this lender and she gives more money, And should we be violating ribbis? This is her question, which I looked around and I found this in the Sefer Bris Yehuda. Bris Yehuda is, should we say, one of the earliest contemporary pioneers on Hilchos ribbis. Nowadays, there's dozens of Shvarim on ribbis, but this was written 40 years ago, approximately. So he writes the following: if the borrower is mesupik, is not sure, and obviously here the lender doesn't know, doesn't remember, otherwise that would be resolved one way or the other. So if the borrower is not sure whether he owes money or not, he is permitted to pay that money, and that's not a problem. He quotes this, that is not a problem of ribbis, because but then he says that the loiver should consciously say, if I don't owe this money and I'm giving this money, there should be no liability on the malve, on the lender, for taking money which they're not entitled to. But he brings sources that it's not a problem of ribbis. Possibly is the following: you have ribbis whilst the loan is current. First of all, there's the ribbis katsutza. Ribbis min haTorah is only when at the outset, when you'd taken the loan, you had committed to a set amount of a bonus called interest. If that wasn't agreed at the outset, if it's come later, that's a ribbis is rabbonon, what's called something called avak ribbis, and less than that is ribbis mukdemes, ribbis mocheres. If you've already paid off the loan, and then you give a gift or you give a bonus afterwards, that is an issur d'Rabbanan. And possibly that's why they are saying here that it's a suffix, and it's a suffix of issur d'Rabbanan, and therefore you can be mekel on the suffix d'Rabbanan's l'kula, and on the other hand, you might be owing the money. And therefore, that seems to prevail. That you are advised, you're not mechuyev to, because you're not mechuyev to pay something which is not sure that you owe. But if you are conscious, your conscience says that you should give, you're allowed to, and it's not a problem as far as ribbis mocheres. Let's go on to our next question. That's, I think, the last thing which we have for today. Finishing a bit early. Perhaps I'll share with you something else, but yeah. So a young man who is a shoichet, he trained as a shoichet, but he's not active in shchita. So from time to time, he goes to the goyish chicken market, and he'll meshech some birds just to keep up his movement and his skill. So he asks, he's going to shech there, he's going to go to goyim, he's going to go straight into a hot water tank, and it's going to be inedible for a kosher. So should he make a brocha when he shechs for this or not? So here we have in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Siman in Shchita in Shulchan Aruch is Yeridea, from Siman Aleph till around Koftes, around there, where you have Kisei Adam. Meanwhile, we have at the margin of the Shulchan Aruch, we have the following note: one who's shechting for the army. Ve'einoi boidek. He's talking about animals. He's shechting cattle for providing for the army, military, and whatever, somewhere in Europe. So, and he's not checking the lungs of these animals or anything, kishkas, not checking anything, because he's not going to eat from it. Einoi mavorich, he should not say a brocha. And this he says because he compares it to something else, where if you have an animal, let's say an animal had been attacked by an animal of prey, then you could shecht it, and then you're going to have to check inside to see whether there was damage done. So that's iskila de beireosa. An animal which there is a known problem, then you cannot make a brocha when you shecht it, because it's very likely that it's not edible. So he says similarly, compare this Shar Ephraim, he's quoting, says similar, that the shochet should not make a brocha when he's shechting, where that no one's going to be biting the animals, whether they're going to be kosher or not. So that's the Shari Ephraim quoted in Yolia Mashor on the margin of the Shulchan Aruch. Now, the classic sefer on Hilchos Shchita is the Tvuas Shoir, or sometimes known as the Simla Chadosha. Simla Chadosha is more the simple halachas, and the Tvuas Shoir is the commentary around it. I have actually my father's Tvuas Shoir, which he used when he lived, going back 60 years ago, no, 70 years ago, yeah. Yes, Boidik. So he says like this. Now, he talks about shechting. This Tvuas Shoir, as Chadosh says, if there is someone who can check it, since it's possible it will be edible, eaten, even though you're shechting it for goyim or for klovim, you should make a brocha because you could change your mind. You can eat from it. And he's quoting here. Pikach Chodosh is talking about that there should be someone here at hand to be able to check it. Kitzer, we have here, it's not such a clear story. And there's nothing stopping this young man to take that chicken home and kasher it. And so according to it looks like according to the Tvuas Shoir, he should be making a brocha. Whereas according to this other postic, the Shari Ephraim, he shouldn't. I told him not to because we have a klal of sofik brochos lahakel, and therefore I told him not to make a brocha. I'm just going to finish off and just share with you something which I picked up when I was in New York now. Very excited. This, I don't know whether you can see it on the screen. Not very good, yeah? So what it is a kuntras called Torah Shalom, Hagos on Kaf HaChaim. So, not to be confused with the Kaf HaChaim of Yosef Chaim Sofer, who lived, let's say, 100 years ago, but let's say 150 years ago, there was Rabbi Chaim Falaji, who lived in Turkey, I think in Salonika, and he wrote many Sforim. One of them was a sefer called Kaf HaChaim, fairly small sefer, and lots of collated halachas and minhagim tovim from many sources, Ashkenazi sources, Sephardi sources, very interesting. And then a bocher was browsing through the Rabbeim's collection of Sforim, which are in Golus in Moscow, and he came across this sefer, which belonged to the Rebbe Rashab, and he saw that there's lots of notes on it. And so that was a very exciting discovery. And so he made this, all of it's available online. And so someone took to deciphering those notes of the Rebbe Rashab on the margin of the Kaf HaChaim, of Rav Falaji. And lots of very, very interesting halochas, and hopefully in due course to be able to share with you some of these things. Let me just perhaps share with you one at kind of random. I did see here, let's take here. Complicated. Right, I'm going to read. He has a section about the separating the tzitzis. When you check the tzitzis before making a brocha, if they are entangled, so on Shabbos, are you allowed to disentangle them? Tzitzis has a Rosh Hashanah, says the Rav Pelagi, Tzaddik Yafrid Tzitzi Yosef Tomid. The tzaddik will separate his tzitzis irregularly. So now he says, are you allowed to separate them on Shabbos? He gives some references, to which the Rebbe Rashab comments, if they're not entangled, for sure you are allowed to check the tzitzis on Shabbos. And in our talesim, they are not entangled. In other words, the talis, the talis godel. No reason why the tzitzis and the talis godel should get entangled. The talis cotton, well, that's, you may know, You're wearing them when you're sleeping, you're rolling over. Sometimes they do get entangled. He says, they're not so entangled. You get a little bit curled. He says, becomes like a chevel mekerocha, becomes like a rope. Instead of being loose strands, it becomes like a rope. He doesn't see that as an entanglement, and therefore you are allowed to separate them from one another. But if they are indeed entangled, like a knotted, he uses the word in Yiddish, verplontet. And this is where there's an issue on dividing them or separating them on Shabbos, and therefore, in that case, Tacha, you should be just making sure that there's nothing missing, but you shouldn't be disentangling them. One more comment, and that is about the tzitzis should be hanging on all four sides of your body. Al arba kanfos. So he's dealing with, in this note, about people who take the back tzitzis and they bring him forward and they tuck them into their gartel in the front of their body. So they got the front tzitzis hanging down from the shoulder and the back tzitzis brought to the front. And that they have an objection because the tzitzis should be on all four corners, the arba kanfos sa'oretz. And so that the Rebbe Rashab comments on that. But I'm going to stop there because I didn't prepare this for our lesson. I'm just tempting you to get hold of this. I get no commission for it, but it's very geschmack Sachen. And as I say, in due course, I hope to share with you some the points over here. Meanwhile, I wish you all a good Shabbos and a inspiring Chag HaGeula, Yudbis Tammuz, Yudbis Gimel Tammuz, and Yehofech L'Simcha, the other element of Tammuz, and we should have the Geula Shlemo Simchas Olam Al Rishon Malkeinu Bereshenu. Also.